Welcome to the 9th of the Practical Knowledge Series events for this year. And as these events have been moving around, this is the first time it's been at Jefferson, so we're excited to welcome people from Jeff in this event. I know that there are people online in locations around the other members of BioStrategy partners, which are Children's Hospital, Wistar Institute, Thomas Jefferson, of course, Temple University, University of Sciences, Lincoln Institute for Medical Research, and Penn State. So this is an academic consortia, and it's run by the tech transfer offices to try to help connect early stage technologies that are emerging from our universities into commercial direction. And this Practical Knowledge Series was designed to try to answer questions about that process. So we are thrilled to have a fantastic panel today to talk about what you know and how to find resources. So it's a fantastic group. So I want to thank Riverside Law and MVM. Mike McCann is actually here today on the panel, and for their sponsorship of this program. And he can talk a little bit about what they do and how they are connecting to resources. So we have Wayne Barz from up at the Ben Franklin Technology Partners up in Lehigh Valley, and I got to tell you, as a personal, whenever I have a problem or question about process or who to talk to, Wayne is one of those people, and he's a huge resource generator.
You're a desperate man, Todd.
And we have Don Skerrett, sorry. Skerrett, sorry. I never get your name last name.
I changed my name a little while ago.
Yeah, there you go.
Make it harder for
So when we have a company that spins out of Temple University, we actually will always tell the entrepreneur there to sign up for the PCCI events that occur out at Embassy Suites in Valley Forge, because this is a great place to find people who can help build out your team. So I'm sure that's why Don is here today. And Mike McCann, as I mentioned, he's from MVM. They provide tax credits, but they know everybody in all of the ecosystem. And lastly, we have Dennis Gross from Thomas Jefferson. And frankly, I'm looking forward to hearing about the ecosystem and how you connect to resources here at Jefferson. So that'll be terrific for us. So I think that's the last. Oh, and I've already talked about BioStrategy partners. So I'm going to pass it on to Don. And thank you so much for doing this, guys. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Todd. That is your name, by the way. Right. J. Todd. My bad. Okay. I guess the way we ought to start this is, well, I'm Don Skerrett. I'm the president of PCCI. At PCCI, we ask new companies to come in, new life science companies to come in. They make a presentation. Before they come in, I ask them for 3 questions, the answers to which they believe will help them get to the next level. And I pick a panel to answer those questions, and then we do the presentation, the questions, and then we throw everything to the audience, which is made up of life science professionals from all walks of the profession. That having been said, let me go to the panel here and take 60 seconds or so to introduce yourself, and then we'll start with the questions. Mike?
Is this on? Yes. Thank you. Hi. I'm Mike McCann. I'm the owner of MVM Associates. My running joke at every Philadelphia event I do is, I am not Mike McCann, the real estate man, as I'm asked all the time. You guys see the signs probably all over the place here. A long time ago, I've been doing business for 20 years, tax credits, a lot of stuff in Philadelphia, and I'm down at PIDC, and they said, all right, we got to do something here. He's like, from here on out, one of the guys says, we're going to refer to you as Mike McCann, the tax credit man, just to separate you from the other guy. So that's what I always joke about when I come to Philadelphia. So I'm not him, but anyway. So what we do is we help companies with, we're a private firm. As I said, we started in 1997. We help companies identify, obtain, and manage grants, tax credits, financial assistance that's available from state, local, and federal programs. And it's primarily state and a little bit of local. and even get further down, and we'll talk more about this later, primarily tax incentives. And what you'll find out today from what I'm going to talk about is there are a number of tax incentives that the state and the city provide to businesses that many times companies are not aware of. They're non-dilutive forms of capital. They're there to help young, in a lot of cases, technology companies grow, and that's what our business is. I'm also here, by the way, the I2N network, the Ideas Innovation Network out of Chester County was supposed to be here. I came here in their stead. I'm a board member of that. I'll talk a little bit more about them later, but I2N is essentially the virtual incubator run out of the Chester County Economic Development Council. And they are a fantastic resource for young tech companies in Delaware and Chester counties. We'll talk more about that as we go along, but I wanted to make sure that I promote them since they were one of the folks who was supposed to be here. Thank you very much.
Okay, my name is Dennis Gross, and I am no relation to the surgeon Samuel Gross. Need it? Okay. Just a little closer. Okay, as I said, I'm no relation to the surgeon whose statue is in front of Scott Library. I have been at Jefferson for 40 years as adjunct faculty, then full-time faculty when I was an associate dean, and now I'm back to being part-time faculty. My primary job these days is I'm the CEO of the Pennsylvania Drug Discovery Institute up in Doylestown at the Biotechnology Center and at a satellite facility in the old Bockham building, which is down on Horizon Drive near the GSK, soon-to-be slightly downsized site, as many of you are familiar with. I've been involved with bio for a number of years, and one of my big roles when I was at Merck, which is where I spent a lot of my time, I spent 29 years at Merck, going back far enough to have worked with Todd's father in clinical research. So I go back that far to back when I say dinosaurs walked the earth. I've been involved with generating laboratories, doing business cases for laboratories, and also in my role as Senior Director of Business Operations of onboarding some of these small companies that we would buy as part of our acquisition of either intellectual property or many small number of cases, particular sites that we wanted to be close to what we would call windows on technology. And I've been involved in building laboratories, so I have been involved probably in about 3 million square feet of space worldwide in the United States, Italy, Japan, Canada, the UK, and after I left full-time at Merck, I've been doing consulting on the development of sites for companies. So I worked in Saudi Arabia for the Saudi Food and Drug Administration on siting of a new 1.5 million square foot building for them and trying to decide how do you build that kind of a building? How do you staff that? How do you grow that kind of very large site? But using that also to learn about what do you do with smaller sites? How do you really look at that ecosystem that entrepreneurs want to have around them? And just because the rent's cheap may not be the best place to be in many, many instances. So that's what I've been doing for the past couple of years. So I have been involved with some startups, and I'm doing some work recently with a group that we're trying to form to think strategically about advising people on the kinds of places to go to. Who do you want to be near? What are the kinds of ecosystem that you want to generate? How do you try to think about the creativity of who's around you? Even thinking about co-working spaces as ways of bringing that community of scientists together, whether it's bench or non-bench types of things. So I've tried to wear a lot of different hats. I'm actively involved with Life Science PA also, trying to bring some of these things forward. And I still teach at Jefferson. I have a class in project management that we do on a Wednesday night also, just to try and have the students think a little bit about this. Because as I said, 40 years at Jefferson, and I've seen a wide range of attitudinal changes from you don't want to think about business because that's really the dark side to we really need to think about that because we need to have alternative career paths for our graduate students, and even some of the faculty are now beginning to think seriously with the changes in NIH funding, NSF funding of, where's the future going to be? And I love this quote from Arthur Clarke, is that the future isn't what it used to be.
Go ahead, Wayne.
Yep, it's all yours.
Good afternoon. My name is Wayne Barz. My title is Manager of Entrepreneurial Services up at Ben Franklin Technology Partners of Northeast PA. Some of you down here may be familiar with the Ben Franklin that's based down at the Naval Shipyard. There are actually 2 other Ben Franklins that cover the rest of the geography of the state as well. So there's a Pittsburgh and a State College Ben Franklin. Each of us operate independent of one another. So we're separate 501c3s, separate boards of directors, separate ways in which we engage with our clients and the community. I had to update my bio for something else yesterday, and just by way of background, I had to remove the word almost from in front of the phrase 30 years of experience. It was a difficult moment, actually. So I've been in the world, the nexus sort of economic development and small business incubation and technology startup company formation for more than 30 years now. And the vast majority of that has been up in the Lehigh Valley. And we can talk maybe a little bit more about Ben Franklin as we proceed.
Okay, thank you all. The way I'd like to do this is to, I'm going to throw a question to an individual panelist, and then let the other two panelists kind of fill in the blanks on that question. Since we ended with Wayne, let me start with Wayne and this question. Life science investors typically look for a team that includes both scientists and a seasoned business person. What makes for a high-functioning team, and why does there seem to be a bias against allowing the inventor to fill both roles?
Well, I'll start with the last part first, maybe. You know, with advice I've given my kids over the years, and then, you know, since then, pretty much anybody who'll listen, and that today is you. You don't have to listen, I guess, but I'm going to tell you anyway. You know, the world, you know, if you carved up the world into only two things that you could do, you're probably either going to work on things or you're going to work on people, right? And what I've experienced from working with a lot of inventors coming out of universities, they are fantastic at working on things, right? Getting the circuit to work, getting the reaction to happen. The problem is entrepreneurship is really about working on people, right? I mean, you've got to be able to communicate to attract investors, to attract employees, strategic partners, you name it. That's a people thing. And sometimes it's difficult to be really good at both things. I know lots of great salespeople that wouldn't have a clue what to do in any sort of scientific process, you know, let alone, are they a good electrical engineer? Yes or no? Probably not. But do they even know how to go about solving technical problems? No. They're great at working on people. And I think that's a big part of what you've got to do. Obviously, you've got to do a ton of networking. Right? You've got to get to every event that you can find where people somewhat related to your field will be. But I think you've got to, it's always troubling when an inventor, quote, is in my office and, well, we just have to find a business person for this. It's like, it's more complicated than just finding somebody that can, you know, build a financial pro forma on a spreadsheet. And so I don't know if that's answering the question, but building a team is really difficult. It takes interviewing a lot of people. My advice to my clients all the time is on their website, continually have an open jobs tab, a way to contact you, and try to meet with a potential interviewee once a week. You know, take a half an hour, meet with people, let them sort of wash over your organization. And because that way, when you really need to hire somebody, you'll have a better sense of who's out there, what you're looking for, what kinds of skill sets, what kinds of capabilities, so that when that person walks in the door, you'll just be a little bit better educated. So it's networking, keep meeting people, and really get to know people. Don't just collect names. It makes me crazy. I get hit on LinkedIn constantly from people I've never heard of. I have no idea why I'd be connected to them. You probably all have that experience too. But you know, it's starting a business is about people. The idea's got to be there, no doubt, and you got to know how to move that forward, but it's a lot about working with people. Actually,
that feeds right into another question that I have here, and I want to throw this to Mike. Everybody talks about networking. Why is it important for early stage entrepreneurs to get out in front of people in the industry even before they have a company or a technology to fund?
Okay, I'm gonna eventually throw it over to these guys because again, I'm more specialized in what I do, but I've been in this business long enough to know there's a very straight reason, and that's because you need to be out there meeting people in the industry and connecting to the resources unless you're out there networking and you're meeting people, you won't know who's offering what's being offered where. Just in the economic development world even, there are a ton of resources out there. And until you get out there and you're networking at some of the various events and meeting the people and starting to putting together some of the pieces of the puzzle as it relates to what you need, you really don't know what you're looking for in a lot of these cases. So guys, you want to?
And that really comes down to, you don't know what you don't know. And that's one of the problems, is some areas are so insular. And I'll give you a good example. I'm active in SAPA, which is the Sino-American Pharmaceutical Professionals. And we started in the past 2 years doing practice pitches at our annual meeting. So people get a chance to do a pitch, but also learn from watching their peers do a pitch to a panel. And last year we had somebody who did a pitch for an anti-infective, and it showed the value of not doing appropriate networking because he really didn't know what was happening in that space. Because sometimes they're just a little too insular. They don't widen the horizon of who they talk to and who they should be talking to. And after making a really nice pitch, someone on the panel, a VC, said, you realize, don't you, that there is somebody else in another country who I've been staying on top of, who has a monoclonal antibody that maybe is once a quarter and will blow your once-a-day small molecule out of the water. And the guy knew absolutely nothing about that. And he was totally unaware that he could lose his entire market very, very quickly. And this person was way ahead of him. And I don't know if you saw it, was a couple of weeks ago, there was an article it was either the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal on weekend that was titled 9 to 5 is for losers. And they're selling these T-shirts. And one of the examples was this guy who has been spending 18, 20 hours a day creating an app for an iPhone that would let you take a picture of a coffee table in a catalog and visualize it in your living room. And he was talking about the fact that he hadn't seen his family in 6 months because he's been spending so much time coding, writing this app. Well, what got released 2 weeks ago, if you read the business press? Augmented reality from Apple, and it's free. It's on every Apple phone from an iPhone 6 to the 10 when it gets released. This guy's not seeing his kids for 6 months, just got blown out of water because he didn't anticipate what was out there because he wasn't talking to people in that space to know that he just wasted 6 months of his life on something that is being given away for free, that Tim Cook was just waxing poetic about on one of his talks from the Steve Jobs auditorium with the new release of the material. So that's one of the things I think people forget is that's the value of bringing in these people from the outside. And networking is you pick up competitive intelligence. You understand what's going on in your space or what's important. And academicians are wonderful. I've been in both environments, and I've had friends who have been in both environments. You like them because they're passionate about what they're doing. They really understand their science, but they are too passionate about their science, and it's too wonderful. And they need that business person to come in and say, you know what? You've turned down 3 offers for either licensing or total buyout of your company, and people really would prefer to buy you out rather than do a royalty because it's ultimately cheaper. And you know what? They're going to stop banging on your door pretty soon. And they need that input from people like Todd and from Heather Steinman over at Wistar to say, here's the realities of what you've got, and here's what it's really, truly worth. And you need that business person who's been that route a couple of times, or as my wife said, been there, done that, bought that T-shirt. Do something about it and the reality of what's really feasible. That's what networking brings in, is going to those life science PA networking dinners and asking those questions of people. Everybody thinks their problems are unique. Guess what? They're probably not.
And follow up with the people. Right?
Yes.
I find when I'm at a big networking event and there's 200 whatever people there, and you're trying to have a real conversation, you can't.
No,
it's
too
loud.
it's
You're
noisy.
Almost shouting.
Somebody gets dragged away for something else.
You're spilling guacamole on your shirt or
Yeah,
whatever.
and hopefully it's a green tie so you don't notice it, but still.
Right, but the trick is then the next day try to remember a couple of those key conversations and follow up with an email, a polite email.
I know business cards are 20th century, but you know what? I collect them all, and I write on the back of them. I met somebody at the CEO dinner. We're going to have one, in a couple of weeks for Life Science PA, and what you're going to follow up with that person on, what you promised them. And yeah, LinkedIn is nice, but we're all getting blitzed. And headhunters and students looking for a job for the summer, you got to be very selective about who you link up with, especially from the overseas that are, looking for entrees into. I know Todd, so they're going to go through me, and they're going to try and find Todd and sell him something. So, but again, follow-up, and I'm really bothered by, just as you said, follow-up is really, it's becoming a lost art. We had somebody in because one of the things my nonprofit does is we provide a platform for people who are finishing up a job or they're changing companies as a way of doing a job seminar. and fine-tuning the job summary, just doing a pitch on themselves to a room of scientists and saying, you're talking too much about your science and not enough about the implications. And that's the death knell for the 10, 20, 30 modality for doing that pitch presentation. But we had one last week, and I gave her a whole bunch of materials. I haven't heard from this person since. I know she read it, but that follow-up is not there to fine-tune. Did this help you? What can I do for you next?
In order to follow up with people and in order to do the networking, you have to know where to find places to network, where to meet the kinds of people that you're looking to meet. Can each of you, starting with Mike and work down, kind of talk about where you would go to start networking with the kinds of people that the scientist or the inventor or what have you is really, most people when you say go out and network with somebody, huh? Where do I go? Who do I talk to? Networking starts with your close friends and then works out. But in this specific way of networking, I think places to go are also important. So, Mike,
Sure.
take it.
So, and this kind of goes back to the economic development things that I would talk about. There are a number of fantastic economic development organizations, and I'll name a few of them here in the area, that will give you a ton of information on who you should be networking with, what events you should be going to, where, et cetera. The first one, and I guess we'll name here, is Ben Franklin, Southeastern Pennsylvania, right? They are probably the preeminent organization for technology and tech startups and funding and the people you should be talking to. All the folks who are sponsoring this event today, not necessarily sponsoring, but are involved with this organization. Temple University Small Business Development Center. So when you're a young company, you can talk to small business development centers and they can give you information on who you should be networking with, what networking organizations you should be a part of. The University City Science Center organizations down there, Thomas Jefferson, again, Wistar Institute. I mean, there's almost, I'm sorry because I'm answering, but these are all organizations that they are very tied in to the scene here in the city of Philadelphia and in the suburbs, and the I2N network, out in the suburbs. So these economic development agencies, and even just kind of close it out, even at a little higher level, the Commerce Department here in the city of Philadelphia. You talk to the Commerce Department and they'll say, hey, you know what? This is a great idea. These are the people here in the city who are some of the people you should be talking with. And through that, you will find the groups and the places that you should be networking at.
There are a lot of other organizations. We keep talking about Life Science PA. Their meetings are great. You have to be a member. So, there's a charge to get in. But there's things like PCCI that you can go to. There's a drug development forum that's held once a month over at Wistar that's partially funded by Rockland, GSK. One of the novel things there is GSK has office hours prior to the meeting, so you can just sit in the room, and talk with somebody about some ideas without an NDA, and get some feedback from GSK scientists. Other companies have started doing that also. You mentioned, economic development. There are a number of organizations like that have these, open meetings, so you can sit down and chat with somebody. In the suburbs, they're downtown packed. That Capital Group is, schools like Jefferson, Temple, they're members. Find out who that contact person is, and you can go to those meetings representing your school and chat with people in other industries and get some feedback from them, and then again, develop those networks. So there are lots of free opportunities out there. There are these meetup organizations. I'm getting blitzed on a daily basis with 3 and 4 meetups that people have, where you can take advantage of the freebies that are sitting out there. That and then the online things. Every society has got local chapters. I did a talk last week for the local chapter of the American Chemical Society. And that's another way of meeting up with people and talking with them. Some are retired scientists who, that may be that non-challenging way of getting some feedback from somebody, as somebody who's been there, done that for 30 years. And chemists are really good. They can look at a structure and say, that's a problem. Those heuristics that they've accumulated 30 and 40 years worth of knowledge. And there's part of your feedback network that you can get from just attending an evening session with pizza and beer, like they do over at the Wistar. Those are invaluable, and many of them are free.
And it's pizza and beer.
Yeah, and it's pizza and beer. At least you get fed for the evening.
You named, I had a checklist and you guys stole them all. Go to meetup.com.
Yeah.
And there's searchable there, and you can enter information, types of groups that you'd be looking for. I call these sort of guerrilla groups, or they're just meetup groups. They happen regionally. They happen by subject area, all of that sort of thing. So I would encourage you to do a little bit of search that way.
Okay, so we know that we have to go out and network with people. We have to, and we know somewhere as to where to go to networking with people. You can also come to PCCI, by the way. We have a good networking faction there. But again, now, who are you looking for? When investors at an early stage life science company, when they look at an early stage life science company, they generally seek to check the following boxes. Okay, I'm going to say 1 is management team, 2 is potential market size, 3 is regulatory strategy, 4 is exit strategy, maybe not in that order, but which ones do you consider, Wayne, to be the most important, and what would you add to that list? You wanted a tough question. I spoke to you earlier.
Yeah, I wanted a tough question. Are they listed here? Yep. All right. Oh, good. All right. Management team, potential market size, regulatory strategy, or exit strategy. Exit strategy for me is always last. If you begin to build a company of value, there will be an exit strategy. It always makes me crazy at these venture events where there's time for questions, the company's pitching, and the guy raises his hand, what's your exit strategy? It's like, I just told you I don't have any revenue yet. You know, we're incomplete. We need $250,000 to get this thing rolling, and we're already worried about the exit strategy. I think it's a little crazy. It needs to be part of your thinking, I suppose, but it would not be number 1 on my list. You know, I think it's management team, and for me, what that means is, has the team done anything like this before? A few years internal to our organization, we've got a couple of venture capital people on our board, and they had used this tool in their fund to look at what made successful companies, what were the criteria. So we went back and we mapped 10 years of companies, and it ended up being a cohort of 144 businesses. And we looked at them across 36 different categories, from CEO age, from depth of the team, to our personal relationship with the person. And then we carved up the 144 companies by winners, losers, too soon to tell, a couple of other categories, you know, being very honest with ourselves. And the item that surfaced to the top was, does the CEO have prior sales experience into that target market? Because what that tells you is they understand the buying, decision-making process that happens inside that prospective customer. And it probably means that they've got existing relationships. So somebody is going to open my email when I contact them, or they're going to pick up the phone when I call, even though they get bombarded with these kinds of calls and inquiries every day about new technology, we've got this, we've got that. And so I think that, maybe more than anything, the management team, so that's who you're looking for to add to your team. If you don't have depth of relationship and experience selling into the market that you think you're going to be selling into, and for drug development, that's often anybody done any corporate licensing in the past, so that you've, you know, started has anybody been involved in negotiating multiple potential contracts at the same time? So, because those people have formed relationships and they have a much better idea of what to do next, right? What to do tomorrow morning to follow that up with. So did I get to pick one? I was supposed to pick the top one? I think that was your question. Because I'd like to stop there if I can.
You were also asked to add in any other.
Any other in there?
Yeah. Anything we missed here?
Capital, you know, how long can you run this without needing to take another job?
Burn rate.
Right? So it's burn rate, but do you have support at home, right? What's your spouse think about all of this? Are your kids about to enter college? You know, what is that personal background like? Because, I mean, life, it depends, but you know, my rule of thumb is you've got to be able to do this for 18 months with almost no cash coming in, right? That varies dramatically, but that's sort of my center point, depending on what the situation is with the founders. Where's that going to come from? Is your spouse, does she have a good job and a health care plan that you can kind of ride on and they're supportive of you? Or did you just get fired and so did your spouse? And, you know, because the days and nights get long, you know, you can't be tempted. If you're going to go out and attract employees, attract investors, you can't get distracted by a phone that rings and it's a $20,000 consulting engagement that's going to take you out of the country for 3 months. You know, investors are going to get angry about that.
And you're running on the 4 Fs at this point, you know, friends, family, fools, and feds. And can you afford to do that?
What was the fourth one? Feds?
The feds.
The feds?
SBIR,
Oh,
STTR
good.
grants.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you've got to factor that in. And that's not a whole lot of money. You know, if you listen to the guy that's president of Inovio, I mean, he paid his staff on his credit cards for a couple of times because he got down to zero balance in the bank for his company. And his company didn't know that was the bridge loan was him.
Don, I have an addition for your list. Intellectual property strategy.
Yeah.
It's in there.
It also goes to how long can you work without money, because those things cost money.
Exactly. And do you really understand what's involved in protecting it? Have you even thought about it? Because I'll add one to this, which is, you know, after the past couple of years, what I've seen is not just, you know, I think market size is really difficult if you're not sitting in a big company where you have access to IMS and some of the other big tools to be able to actually really look at what's there. What's important is the market. Is there one really there? You know, I'm not going to develop a malaria vaccine for Iceland. Get over it and factor that into your product thinking. But what's, you know, well, maybe.
Could happen.
Not in our life. Could happen. But, you know, one of the things that everybody keeps neglecting and it keeps getting brought up now at the past couple of the international bio meetings is it's not enough just to have a regulatory strategy. You have to have a reimbursement strategy. If nobody's going to pay for it, who cares? And that is reaching a tipping point in this country. And I just gave a talk last week where you're starting to raise ethical issues of what can society afford. That new therapy out of, you know, Novartis and CHOP is going to cost $475,000. That new CAR T therapy that the FDA just approved, that's been floated at maybe $1.5 million for a single shot. Can society approve it? And then layer on top of that, we're actually making these drugs for developing nations. So we're cutting out a good portion of the world. We're not making any of these drugs for melanoma or small cell lung carcinoma for India, China, Brazil. Any of the far emerging countries are not going to be able to take advantage of any of these new therapies we're coming up with. So, you know, those are major considerations. If you have somebody sitting on that board saying, well, you know, what are the global health implications for your product? Can we use this someplace other than a country that has got deep enough pockets to be able to pay the bill for, you know, insulin, $14,000 a month for the next generation? These are some of the things I think that get factored into these companies of the future as we approach what people call Pharma 3.0. How are you going to fund it? Who's going to do it?
That's often a big challenge in diagnostics companies is that
Oh, yeah.
reimbursement strategy. You know, do we even have a viable business model without it?
To turn it around a little bit, I have a slightly different approach than Wayne does in terms of the exit strategy. The way I try to look at it, and I know I'm the moderator, so I'll try to keep this short.
RHIP.
I like to put a tack way out in space there, and I like to start with the exit. I like to start with where I want to go with this, how far I want to go with it. Generally speaking, if you've got a therapeutic or a diagnostic or whatever, you're going to sell it to somebody who knows how to market it, and consequently, in my view, to start with that exit, where I want to exit, how I want to exit, and if I have that point out in the future, and I look at where I am today, I can map something that takes me there. Generally speaking, you know, if you're gonna go someplace, figure out where you want to go before you leave the house, because generally speaking, you can go anywhere as far as you want or anything like that. If you don't have a path forward, you really don't have something to tell an investor who is going to put down money but wants to know exactly how you're going to spend that money. and how you're going to include some of the other things we talked about, the reimbursement, and where you see your company going and how you see your company navigating some of these issues that they're going to confront one way or the other, either through the investor or, out there in Never Never Land. So that would be my misguided approach to going to investors.
I have a crushing response to that.
Oh,
but
I was hoping
go ahead.
so.
Go ahead.
But that's that business canvas.
Huh?
That's that business canvas that, people like Art Bonney talk about, you really need to use that to think about the holistic approach of what you're doing. And where is it going? Does that all line? If you don't know where you're going, any path will do.
Exactly. Right. So let's see. We've talked about how and where inventors are going to meet the people they need to meet. This is all about relationships anyway. Let's talk about a little bit more about the money and the government stuff. Who should startups look to for assistance in maximizing their chances to assess or access government programs? Mike?
See, that was like
That's
an underhand
gimme,
softball
right?
pitch coming right down there. Thank you very much. So it's here in this area. I'll talk Pennsylvania. I'll talk a little about New Jersey, just because that's regionally where we are. The first thing I would say is there are, again, organizations and people that you should be talking to and investigating through, especially today with the internet, you can do it, to at least give you a big picture. Some of those at the state level, Pennsylvania Department of Community Economic Development. Most of the programs that are available are, and I don't deal much with the SBIRs and those, I'll talk a little bit about it and I'll put it off to these guys. But Pennsylvania State Department of Community Economic Development has several programs, and then you'll see things at the local level, and that would be obviously the Commerce Department here in the city of Philadelphia. It would be I2N out in Chester County, the Bucks County Economic Development folks, et cetera. But I'll give you some specific programs and here it really is specific when you're a young tech company, whether that be medical device, pharmaceutical, or apps or any of the new high-tech stuff they're developing. So in Pennsylvania, you have a Keystone Innovation Zone program, KIZ. You're in one right now. It kind of bubbles around University City and then runs from, I think, Market to Sampson all the way down to Old City and up a little bit, kind of a goofy map. And then everything north of Girard Avenue is part of the one that Steve Nappy and Todd are involved with in Temple. So if you're a young company, if you're less than 8 years old, you're a technology startup, there's a tax credit equal to 50% of your year-over-year increase in revenues, including grants, is where the SBIR comes in. And these tax credits are transferable, which means you can sell them for cash. And that's really the great thing about them is, as a young tech company, young startup in any sense, you're not making money initially, most are not. So what good is a tax credit? You can take this tax credit and you can sell it for cash. So it's a great program. It's the best one. So one piece of advice, if you're going to listen to me, you're thinking about starting a company, forget everything else I say, make sure you locate your company in a Keystone Innovation Zone, okay? The second thing are the research and development tax credits, and that's both at the state and the federal level. As companies who are developing, drugs or medical device or the various things you're unquestionably doing things that qualify as qualified research expenditures. The state of Pennsylvania has a tax credit. Again, these are non-dilutive forms of capital that you can, the money that you're spending can turn into a credit. You can sell that for cash, goes right back into your company. And then at the federal level, the feds made a fantastic change to the research and development tax credit, where if you're a young company, if you have had $0 in revenues in any of your last 5 years, and you have less than $5 million in the current year, you can actually use that tax credit to offset your employer portion of the payroll tax up to $250,000. So you can actually get a refund of your payroll taxes, or you can get a credit. So these are tremendous programs for young startups. And the places that you go when you want to say, okay, well, how do I learn more about this? DCED, okay? Steve and Todd, if you're above Broad Street. And then if you're down here in this area, it's Kristen Fitch at the University City Science Center. And the Commerce Department too. Those are the folks that you want to start with and talk to about this. And I want to talk, and I won't go on and on about New Jersey, but there's similar things in New Jersey if you're over there. Delaware is starting to do some things as well, but those are the programs here. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, one of the things you need to keep in mind in doing all this is, as my dean said, what you are spending, because it's not, most of this is non-dilutive, is you're spending OPM, other people's money, which means that not only do you need, I personally think you need some legal advice when you start things up, you need some good financial advice, because somebody's going to come back and want to do an audit of how did you spend it when you do that presentation to an angel group or a VC group. They'd like to see that cap table, they'd like to see that term sheet, and they don't want to, I got to go back and find all those receipts that's sitting in a shoebox someplace in my basement. How did you really spend the money? So you need some of that advice up front, and it's more than just throwing things into an Excel spreadsheet. You really need to be anal about how you do that, because they're going to audit. Now, there are companies that will do it for you. If you can't afford it, there's a company that advertises on radio all the time. My part-time controller, and that's what they do. There are companies who are specifically designed to just manage the books for SBIR and STTR grants. And that's their expertise. And you need to think about those things. You can't be cavalier, because you're spending, in many cases, SBIR, STTR, it's DOD money, it's NIH money, it's NSF, Department of Energy, it's federal money. They want to know what you did with it. You can't do a humma at the end of the year and say, I just spent $250,000. What did you use it for? Nice ballpoint pens for your staff. You need to be able to account for the funding, because those things are renewable. And if you're applying for those credits, what are you applying for credit on? So I think that financial person needs to be there really early and upfront, even if it's part-time controller, to really help you out in spending the money and spending it wisely, so you don't have that high burn rate and have to go back to your grandmother again to use her credit card to cover payroll next month.
But what about SBIR and NIH and those sources? Because that's the big source. Right?
It's money. It's not a lot of money. Although the SBIR phase 2s are, you're talking a couple $1 million. Now, right now, the direct-to-phase 2s, I think, have been abolished, but I just saw a note this morning that said that they may put back the direct-to-phase 2 grants, so, everybody's hoping. I don't know if you have any better intel, but that's what I saw online on the AAPS line.
I think the audience might want to know, how do you get help with
Yes.
getting the SBIR, sort of a process?
Good one. Yeah.
Steve Ferg, I'm national co-chair along with Jim Jordan out at Carnegie Mellon in the Pittsburgh greenhouse of the Biotechnology Entrepreneur Boot Camp, which we teach every year at the International Bio Meeting. And we have Steve Ferguson from the NIH come and talk every year at our boot camp, because people don't realize that this resource is sitting there. And he's willing to sit at the end of a telephone and give you some guidance on what to do, show you where the materials are to be able to apply. And there isn't a huge burden of proof for getting that first phase 1 SBIR grant. And they expect nothing back. And they can be anywhere from $40,000, $50,000 up to a couple $100,000. It's that way of getting started and getting that proof of concept, and it's non-diluted funding. That's why it's really important. And it's written into the law, is that each agency that has over a certain budget has to have a percentage of their budget set aside. It's DOD, NIH, NSF, Department of Energy, CDC, certain part of their monies have to be set aside for SBIR grants. And if they have budgets over $1 billion, they have to set aside another percentage for STTR grants for technology transfer. And they have a pay line that's running about 40%. If you only wish that would happen with the NIH, where it's down around 6, 7, 8%. So it's a much better route into getting that proof of concept that'll let you do a presentation to an angel group, or maybe the angels are syndicating too, of getting to that next phase in what I'm calling this continuum of funding for this enterprise of you trying to get this company started, to get to the stage where you can move into a KIZ and then start taking advantage of some of these grants and then keep that ball rolling.
Wayne, you want to go? I'm sorry, about Ben Franklin stuff as well?
Well, we don't really do grants.
No, but
You take an equity stake.
But
don't you?
Yeah, and that comes back to how all 4 of the Bens are a little bit different in the way that we operate. So the story I tell you is a little different than what they would tell you down here. But we do a loan with warrants. So our investment is up to typically about $100,000. And it is a loan. The loan terms are 6% interest for 8 years, and it's an interest-only payback. So it's pretty friendly terms for the level of risk that we're getting involved with. But then we also take a warrant in the company, which is basically the right to buy shares of stock in the company at a predetermined price. So we're investing today when the company is young and fragile and the value is relatively low. So we are obtaining the right to buy shares. It's like a stock option. the right to buy shares of stock today when the price is relatively low, and now we're working with you to try to grow the business so that when we do have that exit, now that it's gone from $1 to $10 a share or what have you. I would say I don't know down here, it's probably similar, but the timeline is probably about 6 months from the time we would first show up in my office until you'd get a check for $100,000. Sometimes it can be 5 months, sometimes it's 7, but 6 is kind of my standard rule of thumb for that. Down here at Philly, I know you need some cash match to come along with it, which I believe an SBIR counts toward. I'm not 100% sure of that. I don't think it has to be private investment, right? So if you can start to line up some SBIR money alongside the Ben money, then, now we're talking some real money.
Yeah, and really, I mean, that really is, in a nutshell, those are the 4 food groups, if you will, right? Of Ben Franklin, the SBIRs, and I'll say KIZ and R&D, but the tax credits from DCED. Those are your I should say non-dilutive because there's some things there, but that's basically the track that you see with almost all companies as I see them come through so the first money's typically the Ben Franklin, then the SBIR, then the tax credits come in the next year because you're kind of getting it off of some of the things that you've gotten there. And that's your first couple years ramp-up money right there. That's really it in a nutshell in Pennsylvania. So
There's also the BioAdvance and a couple of other.
correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Correct.
Wait, could you talk about the IPART program, the Innovation Partnership?
Yeah, I don't know it well, but it's a Pennsylvania program that basically helps you be more competitive for those SBIR grants. So there is money, you apply to the IPART program, and then if you earn it, there is money to send you to the SBIR conferences so that you can get a lot more education about how to submit competitive applications. And there is also a review panel of experienced grant reviewers that will give sort of a pre-read of your application, and then we'll offer advice for how to improve it so that when you do submit it for real, it's improved a little bit. Timing often becomes an issue because the SBIR deadline is here to get the IPART money and have it be effective. Now you're really backing up a little bit, and you've got to have almost your entire thinking for your SBIR application in hand almost 2 months before the deadline for it. But it's a useful program to go through, and I certainly think if you've been turned down once, now you've got an application that you can submit to it and get reviewed prior to the next deadline. That's IPART. That's what I know.
SBIRs are far from falling off a fence or anything like
No,
that.
it's a lot of work
They're
involved.
very, very difficult to get.
It's still a
And
much higher pay
the
line.
best way to go about it is to find somebody who has won some SBIR money. They know how to apply for it. They know who to talk to. You also have to go and you have to make relationships with the people who are in the government so that they
Program
understand
managers.
that you're not just coming in, from left field someplace.
The other program I just started up, the NSF started and the NIH picked it up a couple years ago, called the I-Corps. And that's another opportunity because I work with a fellow who did it, a small company, and you go down to the NIH and there's hands-on classes and you have to have so many interviews you commit to. I think it's like upwards of 100 interviews in your space. And the bottom line is developing that business canvas, but it's also their mantra, get out of the building. Don't design in a vacuum. Go out and talk to the people who are your potential customers, potential people who might be able to help you, and then that puts you in a better position to start that company with SBIR, STTR grants, or go some other route. But they usually run, I think, about 5 to 8 companies a year, and it just only requires 3 people, a business person, the chief scientist, and maybe a finance person is being part of that core team. And we've had a couple of people up at the Biotech Center in Doylestown who have gone through that. And they say it's a really important learning experience.
Along these same lines is the QED program
Yep,
at
at
the
the
Science
Science Center.
Center, where universities are invited or bring technology into a kind of a contest For therapeutic, you get, or for therapeutic diagnostic, what have you, it's a dual grant proposal. You get half from it's a $200,000 program, $100,000 from the QED and $100,000 from the academic institution. I think that's the way it still works. There you, as a scientist or an entrepreneur, you come in with your technology. If you get to play in the program, you get a whole team of people who are there to help to work with you, to put your package together, to check the boxes and come up with a meaningful presentation. And there have been some excellent programs come through that particular area.
If I could just add two
sure.
other things. One, I think Michelle Washko, who invited us here, I think, would hit me with her shoe if I didn't mention the life sciences greenhouse.
Okay.
Right, there's two of them. Don, you mentioned BioAdvanced, which covers the Philadelphia region. Up in our region, and actually in much of the geography of the state, there's another life science greenhouse called Life Sciences Greenhouse of Central Pennsylvania, lsgpa.com. I think they use com.
Is it com or org?
It's one of those. And, whether they invest in you or not, it's a little similar to the Ben Franklin program. It is a great connecting point. They know everybody that there is to know. Where, Ben Franklin knows people in all sorts of technology, semiconductor and software and life science. Life Science Greenhouse is focused on life science connections, so that's an excellent spot to look for both people and potentially money. And the other group that's recently, I think, been starting to make some noise is NCET2. Are you familiar with NCET2.org? They have created, this is a largely, I think, started as federally funded. Now they take corporate partnership money. It's a membership organization. And they've developed a program now where they are creating these startup development officers. And so they are screening technologies that are coming out of universities and from early stage companies and beginning to try to make connections with their corporate partners, while also looking for experienced business people to start to plug into those companies and introduce to those inventors and the folks behind the technology. So NCET2, the number 2, .org is another place to look and start. I'm not quite sure how you submit an application to it. Todd's.
Yeah, the instructions are there.
The instructions are there, so start there. I know it's going to culminate in a demo day once they get through screening, et cetera. So NCET2.org.
And another opportunity is actually the Department of Defense, because of their budget size, they fund a lot of STTR grants, and they also realize that they are a potential customer for some of their products, of the results of some of these grants. And so they will put teams together to help you commercialize something that you're developing on an STTR grant, realizing that they may be the ultimate, customer for that. So they will help you start the companies up, do a lot of the research for you, and assign a team to you to help you think about commercialization. And it's all free. It's part of the benefits, I guess, of getting the grant through the Department of Defense.
Something that scares people to death is valuation. Could we just talk a little bit about the whys and why nots of worrying to death about evaluation at this table here? Whoever wants to jump.
Yeah, well, it's a big subject, big topic, and it's deeply personal to the founders. And I think you've got to be thinking about it right from the beginning. Unlike where I think we are with exit valuation, I don't think we have to worry about that at the beginning. But one of my clients recently has been talking to a potential investor for months and months. Seemed like the relationship was going well. This is a life science company. And then this investor, finally, they got around to the deal, and he was going to give her $200,000 for half the company. Half the company, And I said, well, I thought you liked this guy. How could you like this guy? That's a terrible situation to be in. And, the ways around it are to obtain these grants, so that you can be in a position to stay alive without needing to take that kind of money. But yes, the question on the paper says, should startups worry about valuation? Yes. Yes, because you've only got so much equity, right? There's only so much equity to give away.
Okay, but you're going to worry about it, but, you know, what is a logical approach to coming up with a valuation? Dennis?
That's tough, Bill. I really
It's
depend
a tough one,
on
yeah.
the stage. I'll just, it's sort of off question, but I was at a presentation last week through Life Science PA, the Skerrett Group, and they had a company who had bought another small company that had a very stable use patent for a compound that was going to be prescribed in a physician's office to treat head lice. And they had a really good valuation for their company. But they also realized that even though the company had a really good valuation, they didn't have enough cash on hand to go to the next logical stage and file the NDA. They just couldn't afford to do it. And here was an exit for them, which was a large pharma company was going to buy them. And everybody was happy with the valuation that they had, that the company had on it. And then the company went back and did, the acquirer did a really good due diligence on them and came back, and that valuation suddenly shrunk by 50%. And all of a sudden they're sitting there saying, you know, we just told everybody we're going to be bought. You know, was that the right thing to do? And the bottom line was, ultimately, yes, because they still didn't have enough cash to go on and do the clinical trials necessary to be able to take an unproven, though clinical trial validated technology into the clinic for a prescription, one-time only use of an animal antiparasiticide to treat head lice. And so the new valuation was not what they expected, but basically they ended up just saying, well, we just got to suck it up because we can't go forward. We can't afford to go forward.
How should early stage entrepreneurs approach the notion of getting a valuation? I mean, it's you know, my baby. It's, you know, don't touch my baby.
Yeah, and you probably know as many companies as I do who think this thing is fantastic. It's the best thing since sliced bread, and suddenly somebody stops knocking on the door because your valuation was not their valuation.
Another way to deal with it is on how much money you take, right? So we get lots of companies that show up that they believe they need $3 million today. They don't really have much. They might have a little bit of animal data. They haven't really figured out what their target market is. They certainly don't have a product profile that's developed, so they're not quite sure what the regulatory pathway is. But we know if we had $3 million, we could get through.
Sort it out.
You know, we'll sort it out. We'll get through a phase 1 trial, or get, you know, first in human or whatever if it's device. Now that means if you're going to take on $3 million, you're going to give up half the company if you're only worth $3 million today. Okay, so if we think we're worth more than that, right? Maybe part of the way to address it is can we take less money? You know, can we achieve some valuable milestone that won't be 2 years from now? We'll accomplish it in 9 months. We can get there for $600,000. And if we spend that $600,000, our valuation will increase pretty dramatically, and maybe we can afford the $3 million then. You know, afford to take that on and give up the amount of equity that you've got to give up. So try to stage the investment is often a way at that early stage where nobody knows what the valuation is. You know, of course, convertible debt is the other way to deal with that. Take on debt instead of equity, and now you say, when we raise a round, right, then we'll let those new investors tell us what the company's worth. So you kick the can down the road.
This is just a comment. Next PKS is on term sheets. So this is a great conversation to tee up that conversation about term sheets, which would obviously get into valuation and strategy. So it's really,
Right.
it's really great.
Right.
Teaser. I mean, that's part of it. You know, that strategy of how kicking that can down the road financially, which means really having a good finance person on board to say, here are some ways of really stretching that money so you can get that answer back. Can I add an answer with 10 mice at absorption systems that really tells me that this thing actually get absorbed, or am I fantasizing in what this compound can really be? You know, it's of no value. I mean, it's an interesting paper that I get to publish in JMed Chem. And think about these creative ways of, can I stretch my funding? Can I get a delay on my rent this month at the Science Center? Can I get a better delay by picking things up and buying in bulk from Staples? Any way of stretching the money, you know, beg, borrow, and steal to be able to get that answer by
Well, maybe not
making it
stealing.
available.
I mean, we're not
Yeah, we're not
advocating
going to.
stealing.
You're not reaching that point
Sorry.
yet because it is OPM, other people's money. Maybe it's your grandmother's money, but still, how do you stretch those funds out to get those questions answered? And sometimes we tell our staff about taking classes in business statistics. Can you model it? Can you do a better job of trying to figure out how can I use my money more wisely? Do I need 50 animals? Can I get by with 15 and get the same answer? And there are companies out there who will help you. There are schools who will help you. There are programs at Temple where you can bring students on board who would love to be part of that enterprise to try to help you make a decision more readily. And those are the things that, again, they're resources sometimes people overlook. They're out there. You just got to start. Part of that networking is asking some of those questions, and that means going to some of those meetings and talking with people and asking about, can I work more efficiently?
The
Not just longer.
currency of early stage life science companies, in order to get money, there are at least two basic things that everybody needs. One is IP. You can't sell anything that you don't own. The other is data. Can we talk a little bit about the data that somebody needs to, say we're working with the 4 Fs, okay? How do I spend that money to get the data? Because if I don't have data, I had a company approach me for PCCI, and the guy said, I have this great idea. I said, good, terrific. That's wonderful. I'm glad to hear it. Where's your data? Well, we don't have that yet. I said, well, you don't come to PCCI. Let's talk a little bit about the value of data and what it brings to that valuation, and how to go about getting it when you're just working with not other people's money but your own.
That's a real significant problem because in this era of big data, everybody's trying to accumulate as much data as possible. And what I'm not a fan is if it's not actionable information, who cares? You've got to be able to make a decision. And that's where they need, I guess, again, some advice. So what gets me to that next phase in that continuum? Can I make a decision, go, no go? Whether it's a checkpoint in your process or making a decision. I remember when I was at Merck, we had a compound, we kept going and going at a negative NPV. But we kept going, and everybody kept saying, you know what, the animal models are wrong. Cats don't get heartworm. Well, it's a potential, well, they don't get heartworm. I'm sorry, it's not a market. And we kept that thing going for 3 years before finally somebody said, kill it. How much money did you spend on trying to develop a compound to treat heartworm in cats, and we couldn't even get them to eat the stuff to begin with because we were giving to them in a beef bite. Dogs like beef. Cats don't like beef, so you can't even dose the animal for a disease they don't get. So, that's sometimes
The wonders of big pharma.
Big pharma, you just keep going until somebody finally says, I'm going to shoot it. It's dead. It was dead 3 years ago. But just he said, you've got to have enough data to make a decision. And I was just at a presentation last week in which we had too much data. And you couldn't make a decision about what this young scientist really had that might have been interest to somebody else. And to Todd's thing, we then started asking questions about, well, do you have IP protection for this? Well, I'm not really sure. They said, well, how long have you been giving these seminars? Well, I've been doing this job seminar for about 6 months. I said, well, guess what? You've just tipped your hands. Have you even applied for a provisional patent? What's a provisional patent? End of discussion. It's in the public domain. You've just shot the whole wad right there. Let's go on and find something else to do with your skill set. And that's a problem, I think, for us in academics, is making people aware. It's one of the things that Heather has to do. We used to do it before, is really trying to bring the faculty into some of these sessions on the importance of intellectual property, protecting intellectual property, and also maintaining proper records. I was at a session about a year ago on development of small companies and startups and consulting out at Penn State Hershey. And it was supposed to be for postdocs, graduate students, and no faculty was supposed to be there, but the faculty member was there, and he said, I can't get tech transfer to be interested in my stuff at all. They can't get them to file even a provisional patent on this diagnostic that I think would be wonderful for somebody to have a companion diagnostic. And he said, well, why is it so hard to put packages together for you? He said, well, where's your notebooks? Well, I really don't keep notebooks. I use sheets of paper, and I put a date on it, and I keep a page open for 3 or 4 months at a time. And I said, that's why, folks. We keep trying to tell them it's a legally defensible document in a court of law. So when we used to onboard people, and from big farm, from small companies to big farm, the PIs knew what they probably should have done because they may have filed a patent. But what doesn't flow downhill is to the bench scientist and the juniors of how important that record is, validating the data, making sure you're really doing it in a validated software package. We keep reminding people, Excel is not a validated package. You don't submit an NDA or an IND to the FDA on Excel. You use SAS. The SAS isn't going to blow up on the 10,000th time you divide by 0. Excel will. And so again, it comes back to having believable data. And that old line, statistics never lie and liars use statistics. Having a package that somebody can understand with statistics that people understand also. Don't use some really wild esoteric test that nobody in the room understands why it's statistically significant. Because that's all part of it, is you're selling your science, you're selling the validity of your science, and that you understand it and why it's important to them. Sell me, tell me, and then tell me again.
And is it commercializable?
Yeah.
Well, and that's
Is it
where I
scalable?
was.
Is it scalable?
That's where I was going to go. How much data is enough? I mean, we've seen all sorts of
Yeah, you can
volumes
drown
of
in data.
You can drown in data, and so one, the data that you're getting back as the CEO, does it give you what you need to know what to do next?
Yes.
Right. So that's important.
Decision support.
But I always come back. It's the same way some software company shows up in my office and they tell me about this great thing, and we're going to monitor the water pressure in all the city, and that's going to save them money, whatever. Wasn't that a good idea? And it's like, I have no idea. I have no clue whether that's a good idea or not. You know who knows? There is one person on the planet who knows, and that's the person that runs the water department.
Mm-hmm. Did you
right?
talk to him?
Did you talk to them? And I think the same thing comes true with data. Is it too much data? Is it not enough data? I don't know. Who's a potential strategic partner for this molecule? Let's go ask them. Let's go see. And if they say 8 data points, what are you kidding me? You've got to come back with this and this and this. Then you say, thanks.
Yep, get out of the building.
Now I know what I need, right? Because, usually the customer is going to know, might know. The customer knows.
File a patent before you execute.
Absolutely, yeah. And
But-
patent goes with the data.
But yes and no. A lot of people in academics will go and they want to go and meet that first angel presentation, and they expect the angels or the VCs to sign an NDA. That ain't going to happen. So how much do you disclose that's enough of a teaser to say, yes, this really is important, and after we sign a dotted line and we've got a nice term sheet, then maybe we'll talk a little bit more detail, but enough to make a decision that it is interesting, it is potentially commercializable and scalable, then you can think about that NDA.
And we could just comment that the tech transfer office is designed to.
That's what you're there for.
Which is not how to tell your story without giving away the secret sauce without it.
Exactly.
And we've got connections at the companies that you want to reach out to, so if you work with us, we can get you there to have those discussions and find out what they want to see, and we can help you structure backwards to fund it. Even.
Yeah. They're seeing a lot. I mean, I have a friend, Pam Demain, she's executive director at Merck. You know Pam. She says they're seeing 6,000 to 8,000 packages a year are showing up on her desk. How do you get above the noise level? How do you make it unique? And why is it important to them? I'm going to solve a problem for you. It's commercializable, it's scalable, and it's not a vaccine for malaria in Iceland. How is it really usable?
There's another aspect to the IP situation that I think is critical, and that is, if you've got a patent, what's your start date, and what's it worth by the time you finish what you have to do with it?
And a huge pitfall is not knowing whether or not you got a patent term extension, when you got your allowance, and also what your claims actually are in your allowed patent.
Right.
That's incredibly important. I find so many people that tell me they have a patent on this, and I go and I look, they don't have a patent on that. They have a patent on something else, and they didn't pay attention when the attorney sent them documents to review, because it's the attorney's problem that they didn't get the patent that they thought they had, and their evaluation.
Yeah, even if you have the patent, it's still not a guarantee. Patent in the United States is the right to sue somebody for infringing
Right.
yours. But I've been involved in 2 major patent litigation cases when I was at Merck, one working with your late father. There are companies who will challenge your patent regardless of what's in it. And there's a very good company up in Canada who will remain nameless. But that's their whole entire mantra, is they go after your patent claim. That claim's not there. And in one case, it was for an antihypertensive that I'd worked on. And we were in court for 3 years. Meanwhile, this company was selling our drug as a generic in Canada for 3 years at 10 cents on the dollar. And they eventually lost the patent suit in Canadian court. But the result was they could continue to sell whatever they had in the warehouse, but they couldn't make any more. Well, they made 3 years worth of product. The product had a 3-year life cycle, so they already were selling 3 years worth of it. They had 3 more years to run to sell at 10 cents on the dollar, and absolutely wiped our sales out for our Merck Frost division because they continued to sell it even though they lost the patent case.
And that procedure just got easier in the United States with the post-allowance review.
I mean, talk about patent trolls. I mean, that guy that did that post-allowance, he's formed 10 hedge funds, specifically to go after. Now, after the third one, everybody realized what the hell was going on, so they haven't been as profitable as the first 3 hedge funds that he had. But that, or you can always sell it to a Mohawk tribe in upstate New York. Yeah.
Or State University.
Or State University, but, upstate New York, if you're selling American Indian tribe, they're a sovereign nation and not covered by U.S. patent laws. But that just got invalidated 2 days ago, so. But patent attorneys are getting creative, and that's what you have to realize is you've got to be as creative as them and cover as many claims, but it's not as easy as it used to be. You could file paper patents, use patents, which we used to call skinny patents, process patents. Government's getting a little bit better, and it's getting harder and harder to hide things without real data. But that's the hard part for dealing in academics is people think you can patent an idea. You keep telling me I can't patent the idea, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's got to be real. It's got to be reducible to practice and by somebody knowledgeable in the art.
So it's important to combine the IP with the data so that it really does hold water.
Yeah. Yep.
We've got a few minutes left. Let's see. How important is targeting the right market to a startup's funding success? And what does it take to come up with the right targeting strategy? I'll throw that
Down the line.
It's how important is targeting the right market? So the startups that I know tend to roam around a little bit, right? You show up and you've got an investor deck and you've got an idea in mind about who the target market is and you've quantified it. But until you start putting a product or an opportunity in front of them, you don't really know. So I like to talk about your proactive strategy and your reactive marketing strategy. Proactive is what we think we're going to do, and the reactive is trying to answer every phone call that comes in. And we had, years ago at an event that we held, we had Guy Kawasaki, if you know who that is.
Art of the Start.
Yeah, Art of the Start, and he was an early Apple guy, and he does a top 10. He always does top 10 presentations. I may be getting off topic. He does top 10 presentations, he says, because that way, if my presentation sucks, you'll know how long it's going to suck, right? One of the top 10, and I forget what the category was, but I know one of the things on the slide was "Let 1,000 flowers bloom," right? And so what he was talking about was probing the marketplace. So you may have a stated target market, but it's okay to pitch it to other similar, related, vertical customers out there and see if anything sticks. Because I think you can learn a lot from that at that point.
Let me try to be a little more specific on this. We've had companies come to PCCI who have platform technologies. That means they can do everything but sell pigs to circuses, right? And they have good ideas, they have interesting technology and everything like that, but they don't know which market to pitch it to. This is where I think a lot of early stage entrepreneurs and scientists and everything like that have to understand which market to go for, because it's going to have it's going to impend on the basically the regulatory strategy. It's going to be in the commercial strategy, everything in all of your clinical trials and everything like that. So if I have a platform that'll do X, Y, Z different things, why is it important to start someplace that works for me? Now, some people go for orphan technologies. Some people go for the big market. This is why I suggest that you have some sort of an exit generally in mind before you start, because you're going to have to get there, and you're going to have to figure out which of these wonderful things that your technology does is the best thing that it does for somebody who's going to maybe buy it.
And that's where having maybe even a physician involved in helping you with some of your, and having that scientific advisory board. There's a company now that has a compound that looks like it may be of value in ALS, but that's a tough clinical nut to crack because of the longevity of the fact that you talk about the ultimate valley of death, 99.99 Alzheimer's drugs have died, and most of the drugs for ALS don't work either. What they realize is that it's going to be a long haul to do that kind of clinical trial to interest somebody in either developing it themselves or licensing it from them. So what they're going after is a different indication that's close enough that in this country with off-label prescribing,
Yeah.
that their drug will get used for ALS, and the marketplace will develop that body of data that
Marketplace does
says
a lot of
that
talking.
post NDA is going to develop the data that says this really is working in this space, and what they'll end up with at the beginning is an orphan indication, and then the market's going to decide what's going to happen with it for the more wider indication. But one of the big things too is understanding enough. You mentioned regulatory. That's really important. We have a graduate of Jefferson who's the CEO of Invisible Sentinel over in Science Center, Nick Siciliano. He has a diagnostics, now a slightly obviously different area, but he went into what was supposed to be a medical diagnostic space and then realized after doing a lot of the testing that medical diagnostics have a really high burden of entry to get something really approved well, reproducibility, manufacturing, all the GMP issues associated with that. He did a strategic pivot and realized the barrier to entry to get into the food space was a lot lower, but almost just as important. So all of a sudden, that thing that looks like a home pregnancy test that was going to test for staff in somebody's office is now being used to test for listeria and listeria and salmonella, and he's a big player in the brewery industry. You can swab a cantaloupe in the field and find out is a cantaloupe contaminated with salmonella or listeria and find out instantly instead of the FDA telling you, if you have a cantaloupe in your refrigerator for the past 3 months, get rid of it. Well, who has a cantaloupe in your refrigerator for 3 months that's contaminated with listeria, but now you can find in real time. So he made that strategic pivot, but knowing enough about the regulatory environments of all these spaces to say, I can't get in here, but I can go to that environment, and that's a better alternative for me, and ultimately may end up making more money because diagnostics or medicine they're a commodity. Look at Abbott. You're in and you're out, and it falls out of favor, or somebody comes and says, well, we're not going to reimburse that test anymore. You want it, it's $300 out of your own pocket at Quest Diagnostics as the technology keeps changing, or it becomes less reliable and it's not as predictive as we thought it would be. And that happens frequently in the medical diagnostic space. But for food, yeah, I don't want to lose a whole crop of hops. I don't want to lose all of my cantaloupes. So that's where knowing the regulatory strategy and maybe getting some advice on the outside for people who really know the regulatory space and the barriers to entry, and not just in this country, but in foreign countries.
Sure.
The major markets, whether it's the EU or it's the far emerging countries, or you're still thinking about the BRICS, what does it take to get into those environments, and how do I stay ahead of that curve?
And it is an evolving thing.
Right.
Who your target market is. I mean, I would say the Ophidian presentation a couple of weeks ago at PCCI was a great example. Her deck had lots of targets, right? She has the platform that she believes she can get across the blood-brain barrier, but then she's also started to move certain leads forward against certain indications, and she tries to tell all this story. And I encouraged her to tell all that story at that, because
There were a lot of people there who could.
a lot of people there.
lot of
Let's probe,
opportunities.
Slice it.
let's probe the market. And sure enough, I'm sitting next to a guy from a 3-letter drug company that says, this blood-brain barrier stuff is interesting. Could you have her send me this deck? So when we got back to the office the next day, I told her, I said, let's create a deck that is focused on blood-brain barrier.
Tailor the talk.
Let's tailor it, and now we're going to send it to him. And for a little bit of time on her part, we've got a meeting set. Now we're going to find out what her market strategy ought to be,
Yeah.
right? Or we're going to
Is it
learn a
really
little more.
doable?
Is it there, right? And I think a lot of that. I've got another company in the portfolio that's burned through $24 million of non-dilutive and dilutive capital, and they've been through several phase ones, and they're aiming at these end potential licensees, and their target has moved around based on where they think the market is. Even though they've had all this success at raising money, the team is with them, and so it's probe. It's probe. I've got a slide in a deck that I use often that is a picture of Captain Kirk from the Starship Enterprise, right? What was Captain Kirk's job? It was to probe.
Yep.
Right? Let's go find out if they're going to kill us or if they're going to be friends, right? So I think there's, what would Captain Kirk do? I think is what my slide says.
Yeah.
Right?
What would Spock do?
What would Spock do? And then what would Bones do, right? Because it was a
That's
thing.
right. Yeah, I mean, it's,
I would add on super quick to Dennis's comment about working with a clinical partner, practitioner. It's so important that they understand what their clinical trial endpoints would be. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's where I think
Are they measurable?
having
Are they
an exit
quantifiable?
strategy matters, because you can tell really quickly how naive somebody is when they come to you with an absolutely ridiculous exit strategy, because they don't realize the amounts of money and time that it would take to get to a certain point.
And I think that having an exit strategy for who we think we are today as a company is probably good, but it is going to change. It is
Right.
going to change. It might change. It is going to
What do
change.
you mean when it's like critically off the mark and you're like, you have no idea? You don't
Yeah,
even understand what your clinical trial endpoint is, or if there even is one.
Right.
You know, I mean, is there even
is it,
one? that
is
everyone
it
can see?
attainable?
Yeah.
I need to do a 10-year clinical trial. Is that really attainable? Are you going to do it while the patent clock is ticking
For
away?
scanning patients, you know, 6
no,
times a
no.
day.
I'd also comment that as you pivot, you need to then make sure that your intellectual property that you're going to be invested on.
File supplemental IP.
I would urge anybody to consider the fact that it's going to evolve, and if it pivots, you may trip over something. But let it evolve the way it needs to
Yeah, I mean,
evolve.
you really need to understand, you have the freedom to operate in as many spaces as possible.
Keep your parent patent on, so you can always resurrect.
It's only 20 years, right, from the time you
Then
file.
you get a patent term extension, sometimes you can get patent term extensions for regulatory approval delays up to 5 years.
Yeah, but-
So when you're going through FDA approval, if you hold.
You
it,
get
hold
it,
it,
you
it's market.
Hatch-Waxman, yeah,
But,
but
nobody's
don't
really done
count on
much
that.
with-
Don't,
Don't count on,
And
no.
don't forget about it either.
Right.
You know, I mean,
Right.
it's 5 years of patent life you can get back when the FDA holds you up. I mean, so many people don't know about it.
Well, they know-
Almost all of my licensees, I had to take them to the legislation and an attorney.
They don't know about it because it hasn't been used. Once the patents went from 17 to 20 years, people stopped applying wax hatchment to the extensions.
This is the changes to.
Yeah, with the new change, but the problem is that patent, what people on the outside don't realize, that patent clock starts ticking the minute you file the patent back when the medicinal chemists put the package together, which means the average patent life of a product is about 7.5 years from launch from the NDA. So you got a 20-year patent, it's not 20 years, it's 7.5 years. So
Well,
how do you deal with
the
that?
the other thing, before we break this particular part of the conversation up,
Takes you 3 years
is
to establish the market.
that you have for
5 years.
orphan designation, you have a 7-year exclusivity. So if you happen to pivot, late in life, you can pivot into an orphan designation and also get that exclusivity.
Yeah.
I think that clock on the wall suggests that Todd, whatever your name is there,
Todd, Fred, Sam.
has reminded me that we're just about out of time. And so I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and I want to thank the panel.
Yep.
You did a great
Our
job.
pleasure.
Thank you.
And
Okay, just very quickly again, because I was here in place of the I2N network, I just want to promote one more time. Basically, many of the things we talked about, all the knowledge, the resources, it's a fantastic organization. If you're a startup or thinking about being a startup in Chester or Delaware County, I encourage you to get in touch with Nancy Kunkel and her team out there. You can talk to Todd or Steve or myself to get in touch with me if you need me to refer you to them. But fantastic organization, can provide many resources and connections with folks like these here. Thank you.
Thank you.